Brilliant, cool. So our next Women in Architecture UK workshop online discussion panel. This is part of a series that we've been doing, and it's really to share experiences and really highlight some of the topics that our mentees and mentors are bringing to our mentoring campaign. This one stemmed mostly from mentees as challenges that arose around returning to work. So I think for some of us there's some sort of more obvious reasons. I think there's sort of the thoughts about maternity leave and maybe study leave coming back after the different sections of our career progression in architecture. But actually there's a lot more that comes into this. We might think about grief, or we might think about sickness, or just taking a break in our career, or maybe thinking about changing paths or changing sectors. So we have a really great panel together today. It's been lovely. We've been sort of coordinating in the background, and it's been lovely to see how much we all juggle everything in our lives that we're juggling. We've got small people, we have other things that we're looking at. So I think it's quite nice to get a mixed view together today. We're going to start with Louise, not Anthony. She's borrowing a computer, so there we are. Louise is going to start. I've asked all our panelists to introduce themselves because I think it's quite nice to share their stories and to explain their own return to work. Personally, I guess I've had 3 returns to work. One was when I was a newly registered architect moving over to the UK. You take the break, you find a new job, and you return into a new workplace, but a whole different country. So that's quite an interesting one. My second one was from maternity leave. So coming back to the same role in an office, but juggling that new lifestyle and new routine that we have in our lives. And then my third one was starting a new role after a long tenure and a resetting career break. So, and that was quite interesting in terms of coming into a new culture. So I think these are themes that will probably be shared by everyone. We welcome questions. So as we go through as the speakers, if there's anything that resonates, feel free to drop something in the chat. Feel free to have a reaction within the chat. It's quite nice to share thoughts as we go along. And Karen is kindly going to collate some of those questions in the background for us. And so we'll try and stop around 1:45 for questions and see if there are any themes there that are overlapping. So we're going to start with Louise. We're going to move to Bridget, and then to Chloe, then to Haruth, and then on to Chloe. So with that, I shall hand over.
Great, thank you, Natalie. Hi, everyone. I'm Louise, and I work at Bespoke Careers. For those of you who maybe haven't heard of us, Bespoke Careers are a recruitment consultancy specialising in architecture, interiors, design, the built environment generally. And at Bespoke, my focus is on strategic hires in business support. So that's all the people that aren't architects, basically. And then I think what is relevant to this conversation is not only my experience, which I'll talk about, but the fact that a lot of the people in those senior positions have had returning to work experiences themselves. So we can go into that a little bit more. And then I thought at the end, I'd just give you some advice from my point of view as a recruitment consultant, looking at CVs, sort of coaching people on interviews, and hopefully that will give people a bit of confidence, or feel free to ask me more questions. So to start with my own work history, I actually worked for Bespoke straight out of university. I trained as an architect and never went into it. I went to Bespoke for a job and ended up staying there for a few years, which was very fun, but I was young. And once I'd paid off my debt, I decided I actually wanted to get into the creative industry. So I went and worked for some architects. I worked for an advertising agency for a while, which I do not recommend. And then I actually ran my own branding business. So I would say, did that all through COVID. My first then return to work was after COVID. I'd had enough. I couldn't kind of run a business, look after all those people. So I went back into the job world. And that was kind of, it was quite stressful, which I'm sure people have experienced as well. That kind of feeling that maybe I wasn't employable, that I didn't really know how to be employed anymore and how to do all of those sorts of things. So it was kind of quite hard to put myself out there and feel confident and actually know what I was talking about and what I wanted to do. There was almost too many options. But I did it, and it turns out I was very employable, and I worked for some lovely people with very understanding people, and had a new career trajectory. And I wanted to be an MD of a creative business, but then I had kids. So, that throws you off again a little bit, doesn't it? And I know that other people are going to talk about maternity and paternity, so I'll skip over that as an experience. However, what I would say is, as many of you will understand, or will come to understand, priorities change when you have children, and it refocuses exactly what you want out of work. And what I found was I wanted to reduce the hours so that I could look after my children and balance that. But I still wanted to do a challenging role. I still wanted to be adding worth to a business. And so finding a place where I could do both of those things became important to me. And I think, that's something that we can all talk about at great length. So anyway, after a few false starts, which didn't turn out all that well with having children, I ended up at Bespoke. Back at Bespoke, I should say, and they are incredibly flexible and understanding and trusting as well. I get to work my own hours, and as long as I'm delivering, they're happy. So that's kind of the dream of a mum coming back to work. But as I said, other people are going to talk about maternity and paternity. So all of that is to just sort of say, I have experience of this, but also I do speak to a lot of candidates and businesses, actually, who for whom returning to work is quite a big deal, and it can be very emotional, and people, need support. And I think talking about it and talking to other people who've had these experiences is really important. So, some of those reasons might be planned. Maybe you're retraining, or you're continuing your studies. Maybe you have the opportunity to travel or spend time with family, all legitimate reasons. So if you're going to do that, go off and do it confidently. You've obviously weighed up the pros and cons of that and decided that that is kind of worth the risk of whatever it means when you're coming back. And you probably have a very positive attitude about that. However, some of those unexplained absences can be much more stressful. So whether you've gone off for your sickness or someone else's, or maybe a bereavement, maybe a mental health break, or even a redundancy. So those are the things that I'm really passionate about, and I come across quite a lot. And I think they come with a lot of anxiety, and maybe you're kind of a bit unsure about how other people might respond when you talk about these things. Are other people going to have a negative kind of feedback if you tell someone you've been made redundant, or if you tell someone you've been off on a break for a bereavement or something like that? And I think my most basic advice is, don't worry about it. You're talking to grown-ups, you're talking to mature adults who've been through experiences like this, or know someone who has, either they're people they're working with or family members or whatever. So, whilst those emotions and those feelings are there, you should feel safe to kind of talk about it as much or as little as you want. So yeah, my most basic advice would be, if you can, take the emotion out of that, talk about it in terms of kind of practicalities. If you're going to an interview after redundancy, you might be a bit angry, but that's not the place to kind of unload that situation. Talk about it practically, and then it's done. There's no shame, there's no guilt, there's nothing. It's a reality of life. And I think particularly in this environment at the moment, everyone is aware of that. So kind of just try and take the emotion out of that. Be honest. I think, telling people why you've done it, but you don't feel you have to go into every single detail. You're just sort of explaining why maybe there's a break or a gap, but some things are too personal to share in that much detail. Some things, you don't have that trusting relationship with someone. You don't feel like maybe you can do that, but they'll understand, right? Or potentially you want to set that up. If you were going through someone like an agent, they could set that up for you, so you don't have to have that conversation. And I think, just to add on to that, I think, if you're looking at a CV and you're wondering how I explain something on a CV, I think people do look for gaps. But if it's under a year, then they're probably thinking maybe she had a child, or maybe he's gone on paternity, or maybe there was a kind of other reason. I think if it's going over a year, you probably want to put something on there that maybe just says, break, personal break, or a career break, or whatever that is, just so that people aren't wondering, because they do look for gaps on CVs. I think the other thing I would say is, even if you have had time out unexpectedly, something that you're not kind of excited about. You can still get a lot of positives, and you know, if you're struggling to find work or anything like that, maybe you're looking to upskill or you stay within the industry, so you have lots of things to talk about, and you know, there are ways to put those into your CV, and you know, you can just stay within that mental headspace that you need to be very positive about these things. Equally, if you're transferring from, you know, one sector to another, or doing, you've retrained and you're going, you know, you feel like you're starting again, but you're not. You've already got this wealth of experience. You've got a lot of transferable skills. You know, that it's not really starting again at any point, I would say. What would my next thing be? I think when you're going into those interviews, or you're going into a negotiation about what you want out of your work, you know, be really, just ask for what you need. Be really confident about it. What's the worst that can happen? You know, you either get to a compromise or they say no. But unless you try, you're not going to get what you need. And then 6 months down the line, you're going to leave. So I feel like if you ask and you get, that's amazing. And then your business has bought your loyalty, and you're going to work as hard as you can because you appreciate and they appreciate you, and you feel like you're in a really good place. Over the last, you know, 20 years since I started at Bespoke and then I came back, so much has changed. So much has changed. When I first started working in architecture and I was recruiting architects, there was no flexibility. If you wanted a part-time job, you know, 3 or 4 days a week, it was just straight up no. And now, actually, you know, flexible working, there's so much more understanding. And I think businesses really have, particularly with COVID, come to understand that you don't have to be in your office all the time. You don't have to work the same hours of everyone. So you can ask for these things. And more often than not, someone will try and accommodate that if they can. And if they can't, it's probably not the right place for you. What was I saying before? So if you don't find a role straight away, don't despair. Think about upskilling, stay in touch with news and events, maybe consider freelance or contract work if you need to pay the bills. That can often be a way to, you know, get some insight. And actually, I would suggest that as well, potentially if you're changing industries, so that you can kind of try out some of these different businesses before you actually commit full time. But contract work often leads to longer term relationships, opportunities to network, you know, and as I say, paying the bills, if nothing else. And then finally, I would say get as much intel as you can before applying to a business or going there, so that you know you're not wasting your time or anyone else's time. You know what their policies are on flexibility. You know what kind of environment it is. If you don't want to, maybe you've left somewhere for a mental health reason, you don't want to go back into a business that works, you know, 60-hour weeks. There are people there that you can talk to, or you can Google and find out as much information as possible. And then, you know, also do think about using an agency if you're really unsure, just because we do know a lot about these companies, or feel free to just call up and ask some information. You know, most of us aren't super salesy people. You know, if you called me up, I'll give you the intel on a business. So just use whatever tools you have to find out, so that you can feel comfortable and you can feel confident, and, you know, and get what you're actually looking for. And yeah, I think my final thing, because I think I've probably nearly got there, is just make a plan and feel really confident, and rest assured that what you have got to offer, other people will want. You know, you're clearly, you're working in architecture, you're intelligent, you're skilled, you're passionate about what you do. Just let that show, and don't worry about the rest. You'll make it. It'll be fine.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I think it's really interesting when you sort of talking about that, managing expectations of, absolutely, my new role, I came in here and I asked all sorts of silly questions in those meetings and interviews to make sure it was the right cultural fit for me, to make sure that there was, as a mum, needing to, maybe if my husband can't do pick up that day, is it okay if I rush it? We're like, what's the balance? How is this managed? What would your approach to this be? And ran a bunch of scenarios past. You know, it was just, as you say, when things need to be the right fit, or there are things that you need personally, you've got to be upfront about them. And I think you really, you get a sense of an organisation quite quickly when you start to have those conversations.
think as well, people forget that when you go to an interview, you're interviewing them as well. Quite often you go to an interview and you're excited to have that, and you feel really honoured to be in a room and kind of a bit nervous. But actually, you get to ask them questions and figure out if they're good enough for you. So do that, and don't be embarrassed. And if those things are important to you, let them know and make sure that does work for you. Because if it's not, you can say no as well. You don't have to accept what they're offering.
Yeah. Checking out policies is probably the other part of that as well. If you've got sort of future plans that you want to think about, maybe another change in role or a change in a break maybe in the future that you might see coming. Thank you. Bridget, shall we move on to you? Because it's sort of, I know that you've done a lot of, there's a bit of reverb here, sorry, research into what it is to leave and come back again and the changes that we might go through, especially in maternity. So I'll pass over to you. I think this is really interesting.
Hi, just to check in, is the sound okay? My laptop died and I'm on my phone now. So
yes, we've relinked and re-spotlighted you.
Okay, sorry about that. Everything froze at the worst possible time. So my name's Bridget Monroe. I'm an architect and an associate at Rogers Stirk Harbour and Partners, RSHP. And I am also a mother of two. I have my most recent daughter was almost 2 years old, so I came back from my second maternity leave just under a year ago. And I suppose I think I echo many of the things that have already been said, but I also try to keep mine specifically to returning from maternity leave, just because that's my personal experience and recent experience. And one of the things that I wanted to start with was the idea of a word called matrescence, which I'm not sure if people have heard of. I hadn't heard of it before I had children. And it's basically something that's studied. There's a journal called The Study in Nature Neuroscience, which published this idea in 2017 of how it's a neurocognitive developmental stage comparable to adolescence. And it's a period actually where your brain is very plastic and it rewires itself completely, and that's in response to pregnancy. And it actually, studies since then have shown that that period of extreme plasticity and rewiring happens to last for at least 2 years. So you're actually a completely different person when you come back to work from an experience of having a child. And that's something that I believe is unique to mothers, but I don't know, so I don't want to exclude any fathers from this. But I think it's something worth noting, because one of the changes that have been studied is that it allows for increased processing and understanding of social cues. And so in other words, becoming a mother actually makes you better at reading people and navigating complexity. And the reason I bring this up is because I think a lot of returning from anything, but especially in my experience, a parental leave has to do with laying the groundwork for how you'd like that to look before you go, as well as having the conversations upon return of what you'd like that to look like. But it's hard to design a return to work for a person that doesn't exist yet. And actually, the person you're going to be doesn't exist before you come back. And so it's really, really important to figure out in a sort of pre-leave conversation how to make space for things to be different not just the first or second time around, but also between what you think you're going to want and what you're actually going to want. And I think it's funny because actually this is a design problem, right? We're fundamentally good at solving design problems in this profession, but we're not very good at leaving space for uncertainty. And so this is something that I think it can't just be like handover notes and HR checklists. It has to be a sort of genuine conversation that says, I'm going to be different when I come back, and here's the things I think I want, but maybe it's not going to look like this. And I think the responsibility is not just on the leaver, it's also on the company or the structure in place to say, okay, we'll meet you where you are. This is the beginning of a dialogue. We're going to keep that dialogue going. And one thing that I wish I had done before I took my second leave especially was put in place at least a kind of framework for a structure of how we would keep in touch. And that's not just like keep in touch days, but say, could you reach out to me after 6 months? Or could you reach out to me once a month? Or I prefer to be contacted by text or a phone call or an invitation to the office or something like that, because it's hard to remember to do that when you're super sleep deprived and you're looking after tiny needy creatures and your whole world is completely shifted. And if someone else is doing the checking in, it's sort of like reminding you the door is open for the conversation. And I think that that's something that I know now. I mean, you don't know what you don't know, right? But I would advise it to anyone. And I think one thing to note in this case is that maternity leave or parental leave is a fixed time. Having a young child is a fixed length of time, right? So I don't want to assume about other kinds of caring responsibilities. I think some of those conversations are about much longer stretches of time and much more unknown. And in this case, in a way, you can say, I know for the next year I'm going to be away, I want to have this kind of conversation, but also in the few years following this, because we know children are, of course, very dependent up until they're 5 or 6. There's also going to be shifts that I'd like to keep talking about, and I'd like to put in place the ideas around those things even now before I go away. And I think as both Louise and Natalie have said, it's also about checking policies and finding out whether those policies align with what you want. But once you're in the place of I'm taking my mat leave, you might not be able to change the policies, but you can start the conversations. The other thing that I guess I've thought about a lot recently is what a good return looks like after you're actually ready to come back. And I think there's a lot we can learn outside of the architectural industry. For example, many people I know who aren't architects told me that their companies offered them something called maternity coaching, which I didn't even know it exists, but it's a coach or a structure that can help you think about these questions. Many of them are actually free if it's for an individual, but they would charge for a company to use them. And so I think that's something that I wish I'd known I could have looked into. Another thing, I had a friend tell me who works in the advertising industry that her company put in place was a rule that you don't have to have client-facing responsibilities just in the first 2 or 3 months. And that wasn't because she couldn't handle it or someone can't handle it. It's just like to keep that extra level of stress off your plate while you're finding your way back in. And I thought that was something that really resonated for me because in spite of having been in my current job for a decade now and having been in this industry for almost 2 decades, I found it really hard to speak up when I got back. And I'm not a quiet person. I tend to speak my mind, but I found it hard to ask for what I needed. And especially I work in an office that's really competing with the best of the best. The expectations are very high, the standards are very high. And when your peers around you who may not be in the exact same place of return as you are in are able to do more than you, it knocks your confidence. Like even if you know sort of cognitively, I can't stay past 5:30 because I've got to get to nursery pickup. If you're watching everyone else around you who you used to work very aligned with doing something different to you, you feel like you're not holding up your end of the bargain. And so there's something about the structure of the practice or the line managers, the directors, whoever it is, maybe being able to protect that space for you a little bit while you're still finding your confidence again and saying, actually, we don't expect this of you, and communicating that to the larger team, not just to you, saying, this person is going to be doing these hours and this is the kind of work they're able to work on and the support we're offering them, and we're going to keep that conversation going. And I think that it's about even offering, again, from the perspective of a practice, sort of saying like, what don't you remember? How can we help you sort of re-onboard into a practice? Do you need some software training? Do you need some mentorship? Do you need to remember how to do your timesheets? I don't know. I mean, all this stuff that you might actually offer a new starter. Some people might find that totally insulting and say, I don't want any of that. Leave me alone. I'm great. And other people might say, actually, yeah, thanks for offering. I'd really like to have, a reminder of how to do my timesheets. I can't remember how the intranet portal works. And it's little things that you just, if it can be a conversation in which you're asking for your needs to a point, but they're making certain offers, I think that can really help ease that reentry process. And then that takes me, I think, to my final point, which is that it is a two-way responsibility. And I've had this conversation recently where I really felt like my first, 9 months back were incredibly difficult. I was on a really, really intense project and really lovely people, but crazy hours. I mean, I was almost always working twice my paid hours, even though I was trying to work part-time. And then the people working full-time were working, double full-time. And I constantly felt like I wasn't holding up my end of the bargain. I was, making mistakes that I shouldn't have been making because I was so sleep deprived. And that is another reality of having a small child, is you do not sleep. And anyone who claims that they get, their child sleeps through the night it's probably very rare. And also for most people, that's not the case. And you're navigating all the things you used to be able to do with a clear head and a full night's rest. And suddenly you don't have any of that. And you're trying to go back into doing your job. And I really lost my confidence. And I really didn't realize that until the dust had settled. And when I wanted to have a conversation around how that could have looked different or been better, I was kind of told, well, why didn't you come and ask? Why didn't you come and ask for help? And the truth is, I didn't know I needed help when it all started. I was so kind of shell-shocked by the experience of returning and just going straight back into the deep end that I didn't know I didn't know what I needed, but I knew it was like barely tenable. But I think if some of that groundwork had been laid at the beginning of even my pregnancy announcement and sort of when we were planning my maternity return, that might have helped me feel more able to ask those questions. But the responsibility does also sit with your practice and your line manager and HR to say to you, how's it going? What can we offer you? Do you need support? And I think that's not, if you don't think that's going to be the case, ask for it ahead of time and sort of ask for those check-ins. And it shouldn't all come down to the individual, but sometimes it does. And you can help yourself by sort of speaking up. And I think it's okay to communicate your needs. And I know, Louise, you just touched on all of this, but it is really okay to say, we're all adults. This isn't working for me. I need to make a change. And it's not forever. This is a phase of my life, but I need things to look a little bit different. So yeah, I guess I'm still here trying to have these conversations, but I think if I had known what I know now, I certainly would have laid the groundwork a little better for my return.
Yeah,
and I hope
that's brilliant.
All of you.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, it's one of these things that's really exciting. And you come back and I remember coming back to work going, oh, I feel like I'm rubbish at home and I'm rubbish at work because suddenly somebody else was spending more time in my baby's life than I was. And that's really, really hard to deal with. Something you said towards the end there as well in terms of managing that leave before you go, I think also just the communication to the wider team, because you're integrated into projects and you're leading projects and I mean, I was pregnant during COVID, so nobody saw me and I was asked not to tell anyone. And then like 2 weeks before, I'm calling my clients and they're like, what? And I stood up and I had this massive bump and it was just a bit crazy. And so I think that handing over helps you to step away, helps you to prepare for what's coming. And then it also sort of sends a message for what it might be like when you come back as well. And I think that would also be probably some of the advice that I would sort of feed into that. Also with you were mentioning about keeping up, when you do take it, for whatever reason, you take time out and that return, that adjustment's coming back. What went through my head as well was building regulations. Like, is it having a session with the IT, with the technical director to say, look, actually, have I missed out on some really fundamental shifts while I've been away? Because several months have passed, and IT as well. You might want a refresher if you're, in terms of CAD or Revit or whatever you're working on. There might be a new update that you just need a refresher in, which isn't, fundamental training. It's just let's quickly catch me up because I want to be on my feet faster and I want it to be easier.
Yeah, I would say too, I know now, and I didn't realize this at the time, but like keeping in touch days, depending on your practice, might look like doing some of that type of training while you're out. But if for whatever reason that's not possible for you, like I didn't actually have my childcare resolved until the week before I went back to work, which is its own level of stress. But I couldn't have done that before. But when I got back, I probably, I wish I'd said to someone, I don't actually remember how to like do a page layout in MicroStation. Can someone remind me? Or, we've got a new version of Revit, like you said, and what are the updates? And I think that that some of that is also about the conversation. So, I had conversations with directors and I had a conversation with the person who is going to be my line manager, but I didn't actually have a conversation with the wider team. And what wears you down, I found, was the kind of constant reminders. Oh no, I don't work on Mondays. Oh, I can't attend that meeting. Oh, it's like, if it's just put in place, and ideally not by you, if someone else says, Bridget's coming back 4 days a week, she'll be available these hours, please keep meetings that are relevant to her within that schedule, and kind of lays the baseline, that's just takes the pressure off you to constantly have to hold your boundaries, because it does get very, very tiring to do that.
Yeah. Amazing. We're going to move on to Ruth, who has the male perspective on this, but also another returning to work experience. So if you wouldn't mind sort of touching on the parental leave first.
Yeah, I guess I'll sort of provide the other side of the coin to Bridget's experience, essentially. Although I've seen both sides of it as well, because my partner is an architect as well. So I've seen that side of it within the industry as well. And we've got 2 little kids. We've actually got 2 under 2 girls. So yeah, that's again another level of hectic. But so I've been through 2 paternity leaves now, and I'm still actually going to take a bit more paternity leave later this year as well. And I guess the thing that I want to sort of talk about today mostly is about the expectations and about who sets the expectations. And I think generally as architects, we're usually our own biggest critics. We're usually very perfectionist. A lot of us are perfectionists, and a lot of the time these dialogues that go on in your head, whether you're putting in enough time after you come back, or whether you're sort of matching up to other people's work, at least in my personal experience, it's as Natalie said. I think it was the first time in my life I was like, oh, I'm not being a great, employee at work, and I'm not being a great parent at home. I feel like I'm just failing at life in general. I'm like no good at anything that I'm doing at the moment. But the reality of it is, you are sleep deprived. You're the sort of, your mental load is massive, and it's just about treating yourself well as well, and just sort of saying, wait a moment, I need to have a clear and really transparent conversation, and an honest conversation, both with your sort of colleagues, the wider team, the consultants you work with, if you have a client-facing roles, possibly even clients, and then your line manager, and then anyone else in the managerial team, to try and understand what do people actually expect of you. Because I have found, in my experience at least, that there's very few unreasonable people actually around. So if you do sort of highlight what you're going through, or if you do sort of say, okay, here are my needs, I have to pick up my daughter from 5:30 from nursery, or I don't work Fridays, or I work flexible hours of Fridays. I have yet to hear anyone come back and say, oh no, like that's unacceptable or something. So as long as you do communicate these things, I think most of the times, I mean, again, depending on project workloads, and all of us are very sort of familiar with the sort of reality of the architectural industry, and the stereotypes of, the overtime, and just working crazy hours. So there's no escaping from that, but the conversation is moving in a positive direction, especially in the last sort of 5-10 years. I think we've come a long way in terms of paternity and maternity leave, but obviously it's not perfect yet. As Bridget did mention, there's a lot of other industries that do things that are much better, but I think things are generally sort of moving in the right direction, or at least the conversations are moving in the right direction. So what I've found is it's really all about just expressing yourself, and kind of just putting it out there, and especially to people, both to junior colleagues and senior colleagues, people who particularly don't have kids or don't have families. It's very hard to explain to someone what it is to take care of a little human being, and how much of an effort that takes, both in terms of a time commitment, mental commitment, and then just physically caring for them. If they get sick, you need to get them from nursery and all that. So I found what works best for me is I just try and be as transparent as possible and keep my team up to date all the time. You know what, like my daughter Leah has had she's not been feeling well. this weekend I might have to sort of pop out different times this week or whatever. And generally, again, people are very understanding, and I know a lot of the time the sort of imposter syndrome kicks in terms of, oh, I'm not pulling my share of the weight in the team, and I'm not sort of contributing as much as I should be contributing. But I think most people do understand, and again, yeah, it's all about creating that trust, and because probably, you know, especially with the junior members of the team, time is going to come where they will be in a similar kind of situation, or in a different kind of caring situation, or a different kind of like career break, and you know, you're going to be the person who's going to be the person sort of having the understanding of what other people are going through. So it's mostly just about communication. And I know we sort of just go through a lot of conversations in our head, assuming what the person in front of you is going to say, assuming what your line manager is going to say. But until you actually have that conversation, you don't really know how that's going to go. So, and you know, what's the worst that's going to happen? The worst that can happen is you find yourself in a situation, which I did find myself in at some point, where you ask for something and potentially, you know, because of workload or because of other factors, it's not possible to accommodate you. And then you go back to the drawing board and see whether, you know, what kind of solutions to the problem you can find. So I was in my role at TP Bennett for about a decade. And after our first daughter was born, I just thought, you know, I want to see if there is any other sort of how would you say it, another sort of system that is in place in other practices or in a different scale of practice where this kind of thing is treated differently. So I made the big leap of leaving the office after 10 years working there to go sort of try something new. And it didn't work out great. You know, it wasn't all that I hoped it was going to be. And in about 6 months' time, I was back. And then that was a different kind of return to work, where I was coming back to a familiar environment, but with a completely different perspective now, with 2 children and even more responsibilities at home. So, and then that's when I understood that sort of a lot of what it's important throughout your career is this sort of trust capital that you build up, and it's invaluable because you can sort of exchange that for a lot of different things, whether that's flexible hours, whether that's sort of just trust that you will complete your work and you will sort of do what's asked of you within a certain time frame. How you get from point A to point B, you know, is up to you. I know. So it's important to sort of foster those relationships as well, and not sort of burn any bridges, you know, always sort of keep in touch, and you never know when you come to a sort of situation where you might need to sort of call up on that trust capital and make your life easier essentially in that position.
I think it's brilliant. I think we have like this to change roles can be a big decision, especially if you've been somewhere for a long tenure. And yeah. I think it's nice to think that you can do that and say, well, you know, I always wanted to test this. Because quite often we'll come on to Chloe, who's done a sector shift. I think it's quite interesting to think, oh, I want to know what it's like to work with a smaller practice or a bigger practice. And I think I would encourage, I think it's good to know that you can do that and then go, actually, do you know what, that didn't work out. I can go back to what I was doing. And that doesn't build into bit of disappointment or embarrassment or anything, because you've built this big thing up going, well, I'm going to go on through this big leap. But you just say, actually, I gave it a go, and you've put a line through it almost to know that you've tested it.
It is exactly that. It's sort of like both me and my partner are extremely risk-averse people. So for us, it was the narrative was always, oh, what if this turns out to be a big mistake? But having gone through it, I can say, it can't be a mistake. It's just a lived experience. You know, you tried something, you did it. Now you've learned. You've either, you know, had one type of outcome or another type of outcome. It's just something you went through, and now you know, kind of, you know what you want or where you want to be. So yeah, I would encourage, like, if you do feel like you need to make a change, is sort of, obviously you have to think long and hard, but then do go for it. Nothing is irreversible, in employment. So as long as, again, you keep your relationships intact and you don't, you behave professionally and you've done your job and you contribute your part and your fair share in the company, people are generally always happy to sort of start conversations again about coming back or changing roles, changing sectors. And Chloe, I'm sure will expand a lot more on that as well.
Well, with that, thank you so much. With that, we'll come on to Chloe.
Hi. Hi, I'm Chloe Phelps. I'm an architect. I'm going to touch a bit on my journey through various roles that I've had throughout my career and kind of the experiences of that, and also kind of probably touch on a few things that have already been discussed. But I haven't had children myself, but I've done a lot of managing people in their return to work. So I've kind of got that side of reflections to kind of add to some of the conversations that have already gone before. But I guess in terms of just a bit about my background, to try and explain a little bit about kind of some of the lessons I've learned, I guess, along the way, is I kind of worked in architecture in a practice for about 10 years. And then I kind of had probably similar sort of moments to others on the call in terms of, is this what I want? A bit of a self-reflection in terms of, what does this practice align with my own personal values and that side of things. So I kind of felt like I was in a bit of a cookie cutter kind of architecture system and was like, I'm doing well here, but is this really what I want to be working on? So I made the move to work in Croydon Council's planning team for a couple of years, which was a huge culture shift, and it was massively freeing in some respects, because you go from being kind of one of 100 architects in the room to being kind of one architect in 10,000 people or whatever. So people are asking you for your personal opinion on things, but at the same time, you're in a very rigid hierarchical system. I remember trying to explain to my husband kind of how many people were above me in the pecking order. He was like, "Oh, I thought you had a new senior role," and I'm like, "Well, it is, but I'm also quite near the bottom." So there was quite a lot to do that I went through in that process in terms of learning about those systems. But I think what was really good about the public sector, and I learned a lot more about, is it was a lot more progressive in terms of things like maternity policies, kind of return to work, more diverse in terms of the workforce. I'd gone to somebody's retirement do for the first time in my career, because I think architects don't tend to retire that often. And it's, there were older people there, the people going through the menopause, all of those sorts of things are things that I hadn't really experienced in an architectural office up until that point, because the one that I worked in wasn't actually many people that had come back from maternity leave. But what I was quite clear about in the planning process was that whilst I really loved it and enjoyed it, there wasn't much room for career progression within that particular team. And I also wanted to get back to kind of doing things and making things rather than commenting on things. I was fortunate enough to kind of that aligned with the development side of the council setting up Brick by Brick, which I did that for kind of nearly 6 years in the end, and managed to kind of be there from the beginning and kind of set up an internal design team. So we kind of had this quasi kind of public sector / private sector presence. But I'm sure everybody knows a bit of the story of that, and I won't go into that in a lot of detail, but it got very political very quickly towards through COVID. And I kind of made a choice about what to do next. Other people were like, well, surely you want to stay in the public sector. And I was like, well, I've had a really good run. I've had a hand in creating 24 buildings around the borough. I think and I've learned through this that I like not doing spreadsheets, and I like making buildings. And so for me, it was like, I really want to go back into architecture, refocus my career a bit more on architecture. So I was fairly lucky to be able to kind of set up my own practice called Grounded in 2021, which was really taking the end of the projects that we had at Brick by Brick into kind of the last ones, and also working with another development company on some of their schemes. But I kind of hit, after about 3 or 4 years of doing that, kind of hit kind of the issue that a lot of housing practices faced of there not being an awful lot of work. Personally, I was like, I don't, I'm a smallish practice. I want to work on big size schemes. And so I kind of went through a process of going, is this actually the right vehicle for me in my career to have my own business? Probably a bit like Louise mentioned at the beginning. It was like, well, actually, I like working on bigger projects. It's probably going to take me another 10 years to kind of really build up a business that can really do that. So I'm now working at BPCW, who I was kind of fortunate enough that they made an offer to buy Grounded. So we've kind of amalgamated into a bigger practice. And I'm kind of doing a role which is half kind of a bit of business development. So I'm able to bring the experience that I've had from building brands outside back into the business, but also doing architecture as well. And I think it's, I'm fortunate enough that those sorts of conversations have come about through meeting the right people at the right point and that sort of stuff. But I guess from my career, the reflections that I would have would be, I've always checked in and gone, is this the sort of work I want to be doing? And not being too scared to move on if it's not the right thing to, for me at that moment in time. And I think as I've got older, it's also been kind of more of a focus on, not saying that I'm not ambitious anymore, but it's more kind of, I want there to be a better balance in life about kind of where I'm working, what I'm doing, what I'm able to influence, and that side of things. But I guess just to kind of move back and I'm kind of conscious we're running out of time, aren't we, as a group? But just to kind of draw on some of the thoughts about managing other people in their return to work. I've kind of, I think through my role, managed quite a few mothers who were the same age as me back into teams that I've been leading. And it hasn't always been maternity leave, it's sometimes been sickness, it might have been they had some caring leave. And I think there always seems to be, the common theme seems to be not just there's been a huge change in life, but there's also kind of quite often a change in job, whether it's a physical change in the actual job in a different organization, or whether it's there's been a promotion, or fundamentally you're probably changing the amount of hours or days that you're working. And I think it's finding the right balance between how people can make that a meaningful contribution that they want to make, and quite often there's quite a lot of internal pressure that kind of, I've been off for a year, 9 months. I want to come back and I want to get back to where my career was before, and maybe, and potentially push beyond that. And you're just like, well, let's make that happen. But we need to find the right way. We need to put you with the right people in the right team to be able to facilitate that to happen. And it's not always the same for everyone. So I think probably just goes back to what Bridget was saying. It's like there isn't a one size fits all. You don't know what it's going to encounter. And I've worked with a couple of people, and one in particular who was just like, I'm going to be back, I'm going to be doing this and I'm going to be doing that. And then she kept on getting hit by the nursery sicknesses and the bugs. And then you're kind of into a process of like trying to manage her own expectations, and she's feeling deflated. And I think it's, I've done an awful lot of running at the moment. So to use a running analogy, it's like you can't just, if you haven't been running for a while, you can't go out and run a 20k race. You kind of have to build it up over time. You have to put, it's bit by bit. And I think it's building up your own confidence and building up your own kind of, working out how you can make that meaningful contribution for yourself. And then I think it's also just final closing reflections from me is, I might not be a parent, but I think as humans, we're all we're not robots. We're hormonal. We're physically, we might change throughout our lives. We've got loads of other responsibilities, and it's, as me, I'm kind of in my perimenopause, and I'm kind of having to manage that, and what does that mean for my own life? And it's not just, I think there's so many iterations of things that you experience as you get older in the workplace, that I think it's like the more that we are more open and transparent, and all the things people have already said about what it is, or what are our own needs, but also being conscious of that other people might not know that they need help, and to constantly check in with people is really important. And kind of borrowing what Bridget was saying earlier as well. I will be quiet now.
That's brilliant, thank you. It's quite nice to sort of think about how we support each other, as well as sort of asking for that support, which is also, you kind of think that you have your list. I think we've all sort of had different versions of that comment, but it is, I think it's the experience that you can bring to help your colleagues as well. I will turn to a couple of the comments because we are short for time. Chloe, I know you need to leave. You've got a hard stop, so please feel free to drop off when you need to, and thank you very much for joining us. The first question, I think, Louise, might be a bit more for you. Having taken a deliberate one-year career break to manage personal commitments while investing in my professional development through formal coursework, how should we now approach job search to present oneself as a competitive and well-rounded candidate? It feels like there's a bit of upskilling there to celebrate.
It does. I think congratulations for taking a year off and for doing that, because it takes quite a bit of bravery to go and do that for yourself, because I know there's always a bit of anxiety about coming back to work. But I think what you should just do is search for your job as normal. I think you've done something really positive. It's something to be celebrated, and I think what I would do, I'm assuming this is a related sort of subject. So yeah, just go for the dream now and kind of prioritize the practices or the places that you want to work. If you you would normally have a little, either a cover letter or a kind of paragraph at the top, and really kind of emphasize what those skills are and what you can bring to a practice. And if you're targeting the right ones, and if you've selected a course based on what you want to do, I think that this is a really positive thing that people look for, and people want to see proactive, ambitious people, and they want to employ them. And I think you shouldn't be worried about that in any way. I think it should give you confidence, if anything, going into a job search, and hopefully be able to narrow down your search a little bit, and sort of you're looking now for places that match up to what you want to do and that can continue your development. So I don't really know how to answer that other than do what you would normally do, but with even more confidence, because I think that's a great thing that you've done.
The other thing that jumps to mind is Chloe and I had a bit of a chat during the week about when we're sort of changing sectors, and to sort of understand what that sector requirement is, or that sector. So you're returning to work, but into another role or into a slightly different sector. And we were sort of talking a little bit about do you need to do a little bit of research before you get in there, or do you come into it and say, well, these are the things I need to know? And I do think we are such a small industry that we can seek support quite quickly. So you could call a consultant and say, look, actually, I mean, this is my hypothetical. If you have studied in a slightly different area than you were practicing before, you could probably have contacts in that area quite quickly to say, actually, what is it? Or where are some big leads at the moment, or that kind of, to help you prepare for going into what might be a slightly different environment than you were before because of your new skill set. That's what I'm thinking. So it's probably finding some people doing the same thing just through the avenues and the contacts that you have as well. The next one is an AI one. So whoever on the panel can answer this, just jump in, please. How can women architects returning to work leverage AI as an advantage rather than barrier in rebuilding their careers and competing in the current job landscape?
I can maybe have a go at that, or if you want to go first, Bridget. I think we're going through this with my partner actually at the moment, because she's sort of fallen slightly behind with the sort of all the new tools and everything that are used in the industry around AI and everything. But we at TV Bennett do sort of try and keep on the frontier of these things. And I found, especially in terms of distilling information, when you're coming back, it's this barrage of information that you're sort of put on there. You have to sort of catch up with all the different things that happen when you have been away, especially when talking specifically for paternity leave. Kind of, you need to sort of get the historical context and everything. And just generally, we found that it's a great tool to sort of summarize and distill large amounts of information. So that's one thing I would say that definitely is something that you can use to your advantage when returning to work. Is sort of you're already either in a new environment, or you have a lot larger mental load if you have kids and everything. So I don't think there's anything wrong with just using the right tools for the right job to then sort of try and make your life as easy as possible. I know there's a lot of ethical quandaries and everything around AI and a lot of conversations around that, but at the sort of base of it, if a tool will help you sort of get through the day and get to your children or do your job better, then 100% it should be sort of leveraged. That's sort of more from a the kind of textual information or sort of digesting large amounts of information. And then just in terms of the more visual side of things, in terms of production of visuals and collateral and writing and everything, I'd say probably that one I would personally recommend to sort of not too worried about that one too much, because that part of the industry is moving so fast that if you miss what's going on now, there's a new thing that's going to be around the corner within a week, within a month, or in a couple of months. So just take that at your own pace and sort of pick it up as you go, and you don't necessarily need to sort of know and follow every latest trend or every latest tool that's on the market, essentially, until you can sort of get into a headspace or you can get into a place where you can comfortably test these things out and see what works for you and how you can use it in practice or in your workflow.
Can I just quickly add to that one thing I've used AI for recently that a friend recommended to me is helping you if you're going to do stuff like updating a CV or writing for yourself. One thing I did that was really interesting was I wrote some sort of professional blurb about myself, and then I asked it to rewrite it like I was a white man, and it did. It made it much more direct and much less sort of, I wouldn't say it was boasting, but it was just more factual. And I think there's ways you can use AI to help yourself, even in very small ways that women, we might not all like. You can't undo many years of sort of society telling you to think a certain way, but AI can reflect on things in different ways than you naturally would. And that's a way you can use it straight away, especially if you're going back to work. And it's worth kind of exploring. It's pretty fascinating.
Yes, I certainly, when I was doing mine, I put in a blurb, just a project synopsis, but it didn't quite fit the format of my portfolio and my page sheeting that I wanted perfectly. So it was like, reduce it by 3 words, because I was starting to just really painstakingly go through, and you're actually this bit, I need to get some flow on it. Very quick question on the AI, Louise. I'm assuming not many architecture practices are using AI to edit CVs being submitted. Are most practices still sort of personally reviewing? They're not necessarily going through.
Much so, actually, everyone prefers to sort of go through personally, and I think it's, I do see some CVs that obviously have been through the AI machine, but if you're clever about it, then use it as a tool, but not like to do it for you exactly. So you might sort of use it to give you some advice, but I think still having that sort of slightly personal touch, that making sure that it does still feel kind of like you, because ultimately that's who they're going to be employing, I think is important. But no, I'm still sending CVs to an HR person who is reviewing those and then going through the sort of more traditional way.
Mm-hmm. Should we just take one? There's a couple more questions here. Sorry, Chloe, was it Bridget that needed to drop off? But maybe you do as well. I couldn't remember. For many women,
I can stay for a little bit.
Okay. For many women in architecture, the later timing of starting a family overlaps with perimenopause, both physically and emotionally demanding phases. How can organisations better support women during this intersection? That's a tough one.
I think it's all about women's health generally, because it's not, I mean, obviously that's quite a double whammy, coming back to work and also experiencing that. But I think it is about, and I think organisations have got better. I'm not saying they're perfect, but I think management processes are better at being able to spot kind of when people might be struggling, and what you can kind of put in place to kind of help support people. And quite often other people will spot it before you've noticed it yourself, particularly with perimenopause, I think. Or at least they'll notice change in your behaviours. They might not know exactly what's going on, and you might not really know what's going on, but I think it's just one of those, you just have, and it could be a multitude of other things. It might not even be perimenopause, but I think it's just having that opportunity to kind of check in and reflect with people how they're feeling. Do they need any time? I mean, it's a lot of practices now have, if they've got kind of healthcare available, like I know I've managed benefit from Vitality and also Bupa as well in different places that I've worked, and quite often there's add-ons to those that are kind of chat or kind of menopause hotlines or chat kind of apps. Like there's something called Peppy that comes with Vitality if you've got access to that, and I found that a really useful process. It's free as long as you've got the healthcare type thing. That was really beneficial alongside going to the GP, because they kind of armed me with a bit more information and they could ask me a few questions. And I think just all of those, there's actually quite a wealth of tools around for maybe bigger practices. I don't know. I don't know what the smaller practices are offering.
Yeah, I think on our end, from what I know at least, we've even recently introduced the menopause leave as a separate kind of leave balance as well. For it's there for women to take. And also I'd say the biggest thing is just having a conversation and talking about these things, because in our experience, I think we just find a lot of people, especially men, don't ever consider and don't even know about these things. So it's all about sort of just creating a conversation and a discussion around it, so people are aware, line managers are aware, and how to sort of navigate these kind of situations.
Yeah, and I think it's also opening up these, making sure that the men and the women are going to the menopause training. Like my husband's at a big practice, another architecture practice, and he was the only man that went to the menopause training, and he was like, it's really important from my point of view that I know that this is happening. And he kind of went because he knew it was happening to me and he was interested in it. But it, I think it's not just something that affects women.
The next one is a question just about if you've got to a point where you feel like, based on your priorities, you now feel like having a job between countries, the UK and the home country, is what you need. What sort of role or company do you think could help achieve that? Louise, I don't know if this is something that comes to you very often or not. I'm imagining it's probably going to need to be a practice that has, unless you're wanting to start and stop, an international practice that you could switch offices in or something like that.
Yeah. I think, to be honest, these roles don't tend to come through recruitment agents. It tends to be, and I'm sorry if this isn't what you want to hear, it tends to be that you're in a role that then you talk to your line manager or your HR or whatever, and then that's something that you negotiate for yourself because they want to keep you. So if that's something you're looking to do in the future, you may have to find a job locally to start with a view to discussing with them, could that be something for the future? But mostly recruitment consultants are probably right. Most of those roles that are going to be filled internally rather than someone coming to me, because to be honest, if they advertised for that, there would be thousands of people.
Exactly. I mean, certainly I know of engineering firms who to keep you on board and to give you more experience will say, well, why don't you go to the Australian office for a year or something? So it's almost like a secondment. So there's a return to work aspect to it, but you are within the same organisation. But for them, they can see the benefit of you coming back to London with an international experience.
And I do know of one, maybe two practices where they have international offices and they do an exchange, but it will be like a month. So you may go and work in Madrid for a month and one of your counterparts would come to London. But those sort of things, as I say, tend to be more kind of internal conversations.
And it may be within a multidisciplinary firm rather than a straight architecture firm as well, perhaps, in terms of other avenues to pursue. Okay, final question. One is, and then we will close, and thank you very much for this little bit of extra overtime for this. Please, could you summarise your thoughts, processes when adapting to a new work environment, specifically how you determine priorities, stay grounded and move beyond personal limitations, particularly for neurodivergent individuals managing overwhelm? Is there a baseline strategy? Is there then to relate to the amazing, thank you for the amazing insights we're sharing. So is there sort of a base to, establish what the needs are?
Yeah, I guess just from my personal experience, I think what helped me was just putting systems in place in order to be able, as we touched on before, it's just sort of, the amount of information that you're expected to sort of take in when you are in a new environment in terms of, personal relationships, in terms of work protocols, workflow, all the IT and tools and everything that you need to sort of get on top of. It's just a case of, I think, systemizing everything and breaking stuff down into digestible chunks where you can sort of, slowly but surely pick at it, essentially, because I don't think there's anyone, unless you're like super talented and I don't know, like someone who can really take all that information in. There's no really good way other than to give it time and to just put systems in place to have notes, to have keep regular meeting notes, keep personal notes as well on I know we don't do it a lot in our industry, but there's this idea of a personal CRM, so like what's called a customer management system, but to sort of just keep your personal notes on people as well, just to know who is looking for what the expectations are, and then similarly with all the sort of practical stuff in terms of the IT infrastructure and all the other stuff. Again, I think it's a case of breaking things down into manageable chunks and not necessarily trying to understand and do everything on day one. And I think most teams and most practices are usually quite aware of the fact that, I mean, yes, if you're coming from another practice or another, you will have some kind of baseline, and it's just a case of giving yourself enough time to build up that muscle memory of how the new filing system works, or how the new emailing system works, and or who you need to talk to when you have X or Y question.
Karen, I've spotlighted you because I think you might have insight here for us.
No, it's probably just a good time to point out that the REBA Academy have kind of released their Return to Work series now. So going there, and I can see 3 of the CPDs up, about one's from Bespoke, actually, CVs and interviews, and there's social and cultural concerns, and there's another one, Returning to Work, which I've done. But they will give you some more practical strategies of how to kind of manage the whole return to work and just give that a bit more structure. And there'll be activities within there that might kind of just help you recognize, okay, I need to go and do that, or this exercise will be good, or here's a list to help me do things. So I think that's just and they're £15 each, these series of videos, so they're pretty accessible and on demand. So I think that's a good port of call for anybody, whether it's maternity leave or coming from overseas or having a caring role. It's covering all of those scenarios, these series. So they're online at architecture.com at the moment.
Brilliant. I think that's a perfect place to finish. There's sort of external resources. I hope there have been some useful insights, or at least similarities identified between some of the speakers today and maybe what some of the callers are going through or considering. Maybe there's exciting plans coming up where people are thinking about taking breaks in their career. Thank you, Louise. Thank you, Haruth. Thank you, Karen, for your help in the background as well. I guess we will see each other on the next workshop call. We have the next month, we have our aspirational leader, a keynote workshop, and that's going to be with Tara Gablode. So that's a very exciting one coming up. So that will be next month if you want to look out for the link for that. And I'll say thank you and goodbye.
Thanks,
Thank you.